All right, everybody, this is Matt. Hey, we're going to talk about our week 4 topic, and that is the selection and development of police officers. This is something I know that several of you are very interested in, and some of you, you're not looking to go this route, but that's okay because you certainly need to understand this to understand policing. So let's start off talking about recruitment methods. So is police work any different? Do police departments, can they go out and can they recruit employees in the same way that, corporations and businesses like that can? Well, yeah, absolutely they can. And they use advertisements, special interest groups, campus recruiting, employee referrals. I'll give you a pretty innovative example, actually, and this took place as done by the Boise Police Department. But we were looking at a shortage of police officers, a lot of retirements, and every police agency throughout the United States has been going through this for about 10 years now, maybe a little bit longer. And so back during the very first Fiesta Bowl, and I know a lot of you are probably not going to remember this, but when Boise State football first came to greatness and they beat the University of Oklahoma in the Fiesta Bowl, and they were super underdogs, and it's one of the greatest college football games to ever be played, not just because I'm biased, but because it was a phenomenal game. And by the way, I was stuck in the emergency room at St. Alphonsus that night on an investigation, so I was trying to watch this game between interviews with witnesses and victims on an investigation. So that was my experience, but I did get home in time to see the overtime win. So if you've never watched that game, go watch it. Okay, I digress. Anyway, after that game, Boise State University football became extremely well known throughout the entire United States, and then Boise also had been getting a lot of publicity as a great place to live. This had been going on for years, and the Boise Police Department needed to recruit officers, and there are a lot of police officers around the nation, particularly in Southern California and in other places around the nation with great experience who would like to move out of the urban areas that they're living in and work somewhere else. So the Boise Police Department actually took out ads in the newspaper in Southern California and kind of piggybacked on the popularity of Boise State University after that game to say, come move to Boise and be a police officer. And they also took out an ad in the newspaper, the USA Today, which was a really large and widely distributed newspaper back then. So you can be innovative. Police departments do get innovative in trying to bring in new officers. So the different strategies are going to apply to different genders and different races as well. And you're going to see this maybe more in more racially diverse places than we have here in Idaho and in the Treasure Valley in particular. But frequently, you will see the need for people of different abilities to speak different languages. So, for example, Orange County, California, I think there's something like 80, last time I knew, like 82 languages that were spoke there or something like that. So all those different agencies in that county and in Los Angeles County, they need people that can speak different languages. And, of course, we're always trying to have police departments mirror the makeup of the communities in which we work. So we try and mirror the racial diversity in that community, but what we never quite are able to mirror is the gender makeup. So generally, police departments are always dominated by male police officers, but of course, all of our communities are about 50-50. Actually, a few more females than males. Okay, so let's talk about some non-traditional recruitment. I encourage you all to go to this link. I'll link up to this in the assignment today, so you can find this link there. The New York Police Department Cadet Corps. This is a really interesting opportunity. Now, this information is old, so if you go to the new link, you'll probably find new and updated information. But really interesting. You might want to pause on this slide for a second in the video so you can look at these statistics. But if you wanted to become a police officer, and if you were interested in working in an unbelievably exciting place like New York City, look at the way you could do it. You could enter their cadet corps and earn up to $64,000 while you were going to college, get your college paid for, make money, have benefits, have sick leave, vacation, and then when you graduated, become a police officer. It's a really interesting way to recruit people in and to do things. $10,000 in tuition assistance annually, I bet you that's gone up, and I bet you that hourly wage has gone up as well. But really interesting opportunities out there for people who want to become police officers And then I'm sure there's an obligation. I'm sure you have to work at the New York Police Department for a certain amount of time to pay all of this back. But man, what a place to learn how to be a police officer. There is no other place like that in the world. So you can do that there. There's other opportunities like that in other places around the country. We'll go to Modesto, California here, and this just happens to be a city I'm very familiar with. I went to high school in this city and was a sheriff's deputy in this county for a while I was still in California. And they have community service officers. And at the Boise Police Department, we have community service officers as well. And this is a way to get a non-sworn position to work as a civilian, but to overlap with law enforcement and do a lot of the functions that police officers used to do. So, for example, investigating traffic accidents, taking photographs, collecting evidence, and things like that. So you're learning police skills while you are working as a civilian. You're building your reputation, getting your foot in the door, and really putting yourself in a great position to later become a police officer at that agency, either when they're hiring or when you're eligible, maybe after you turn 21 or after you get your degree or whatever that may be. There's a lot of interesting opportunities out there, and I'll link up to this one as well for you. Well, let's talk about selection. So there are a group of minimum standards that police officers have to hit to be able to be qualified to be hired as a police officer. I just mentioned one of those, that is age. Now, height and weight, I don't know that these are written, but there is some reasonable standard out there for that. I don't know exactly what that is, but if you're 4'2", 750 pounds, you're not going to be able to do the job. There's other things you won't pass on this list. Vision is supposed to be corrected to 20/20 and uncorrected. I forget what it is, but probably 2100 or something like that. I can't remember exactly. Physical agility, this is a test that you will take right at the outset of trying to get hired by a police department. Well, you'll have to run around, drag a dummy, go over walls, and do all of these things in a certain time frame. Your strength, this will be measured generally by doing push-ups. Residency can sometimes be an obstacle. For example, I can remember looking into working for the Alaska State Troopers at one point, but to be hired, you had to be an Alaska resident. I don't know if that's still the same, but sometimes that can be an obstacle to overcome. Education, for example, at the Boise Police Department, you're required to have 60 college credits completed to work there. But if you look at like San Francisco PD or San Jose PD in California, they require a bachelor's degree. So that can vary from agency to agency. Your background, you've got to have a good, clean background that they can hire you through. Now, how do they determine what that is? The minimum standard on your background is actually going to be set by the Idaho Post, if you're an Idaho Peace Officer, standards and training. But each state is going to have a regulatory agency that certifies police officers, and they are going to set the minimum standards. And if you don't meet those minimum standards, they will not certify you. Therefore, no agency can hire you and employ you as a police officer. But a police agency is always able to set their background standards higher than what Post does. They can set them higher, and they can have a higher minimum standard for their agency. Just like education, the minimum requirement for education in the state of Idaho is a GED, and you can work as a police officer. But Boise PD says, no, we want 60 college credits. So they can always go higher. They just can't go below the minimum standards. Your psychological condition, this will be gauged by a trained psychologist as you go through your psych test, and your medical condition by a doctor. Okay, so we'll jump over to the Boise Police minimum standards here really quick. And actually this may be updated now too, but go to their website if you want to see it updated. They're going to want to know your current and past employment records, your personal references, and your acquaintances. And by the way, they went all the way back to my hometown in California, which is a small, tiny little town, to talk with people that I knew when I was 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. Personal references and acquaintances, mentioned that. Your criminal history, driving history, your credit. Why do they care about your credit? Why would you think that a police department would care what your credit score is? Well, there's two things. One, if you are absolutely buried in debt, then you are more corruptible than other people, because debt is a major stressor that causes people to get desperate. And two, do you keep your word? Have you gone bankrupt several times? Have you failed to make payments? Are you an honorable person who keeps your word? So your credit inquiry can be important. Your neighborhood contacts, your personal history statement. Let me give you a tip here. Any of you who want to go into law enforcement, the very first time that you fill out a personal history statement before you turn it in, especially if it's on paper. But if it's electronic, do the same thing. Make a copy of this personal history statement. The reason why is if you ever decide to go to work for another police agency, they're going to make you do it all over again. And when you start filling one of these out, you'll realize how difficult it is to pull up all of this information from your past. So make sure you keep a copy so you don't have to do that twice. Boise, I should change that. It's now 60 college credits, but it used to be 64, so they reduced the standard a little bit. They're going to know about your prior drug use. Sometimes you can get in with some prior drug use. Some prior drug use will automatically eliminate you. You have to look at the standards there. Then on the physical side, the vertical jump. Can you jump vertically 14 inches? Sit-ups in 1 minute, a minimum of 15. Push-ups. No time limit, but you've got to be able to do at least 21 repetitions to pass. A 300-meter run, maximum time of 77 seconds to pass, and a 1.5-mile run with a maximum time of 17 minutes and 17 seconds to pass. Those are not very difficult, not very difficult at all. Your knowledge, your skills, and abilities. These are things that a police department can require that you have to be able to work there, and they can base their standards on these things. So they can't discriminate against you or against anybody, but they can say to be a police officer here, you've got to have these certain knowledge, skills, and ability. Let's talk about the pathway to being hired really quick. So this can vary from agency to agency a little bit, but in general, this is pretty accurate. So number 1 on this, what do you think this would be? I've got number 2 is your physical agility test. This can be waived if you're what's called a lateral transfer. We'll talk about that coming up here in a minute. But number 1 is generally a written test. Generally, you've got to take a civil service type test and pass it and rank high enough to be in the first group of people that could potentially be hired to move on to further steps. Now, these days, a lot of times, an agency will have you come in and take the written test and do the physical agility test both on the same day. Because if you don't pass one of those, then you're automatically eliminated. There's no reason to keep your file in the stack or to have you come back a second time. So a lot of times they'll do those in the same day, but both of those things have to be done. And then generally after you pass those and they like what they see on your application, maybe your resume, and if you scored well on those tests, then you'll move on to an oral interview. In police work, we call it an oral board, and it's different than a traditional job interview in that you'll generally be interviewed by 3 or more people from the agency in what's called an oral board, and they all have a different role in the interview. You're going to want to look at going to observe a mock oral board before you ever go and do your first one, because this is a different way of conducting a job interview. For example, they're going to ask you about scenarios. They're going to ask you about ethics. They're going to ask you about why you want to be a police officer, and they're going to challenge you on those things to see, for example, in your scenario questions, if you can make a logical decision and then stick with it. Now, they're not testing you to see if you're at the same level as an expert or a master police officer, but they do want to know if you can make a good decision, something that's reasonable based on what you know or what you don't know, meaning you don't have all of your education yet, and can you stick with that decision? That's really important in police work because your job as a police officer is to come into a situation and to restore order. And if you can't make a decision, even if it's not perfect, and then stick with that decision to restore order, you cannot be effective as a police officer. So that's one where they're going to trip you up a little bit on an oral board. You should go to a mock oral board and observe that ahead of time before you do your first one. Coming up after the oral board is going to be your background. Okay, so they're going to have a background investigator look into you and investigate you and make sure that there's nothing there that would eliminate you as a candidate. And then after the background investigation is done, they're going to do a polygraph, and almost every agency is going to do a polygraph. And the polygraph is designed to do 2 things. It's designed to catch anything that would eliminate you as a candidate that was missed in the background investigation, and it's also designed to see if you are an honest person. Honesty is by far the single most important characteristic in law enforcement. You cannot survive a career in law enforcement if you're a liar. They will fire you for lying. You can't do that. So in the polygraph, not only are they looking for things they've missed, but they're also looking to see if you're an honest person. So this is my standard advice I give to everybody who is going to go through this. If you've done something and you're worried it's going to eliminate you, do not lie about it on the polygraph, because when they detect that you're lying, you're disqualified. There's a chance that whatever you did, you can survive and they'll still hire you. There's still a chance. But if you lie, there's no chance at all. So do not lie. Okay, number 6, what comes after polygraph? This is a conditional offer. So once they get past the polygraph and they think they want to hire you, they're going to want to do a psychological exam as well as a medical exam. But in order to do that, in order to be that invasive, they have to make you a conditional offer. So they have to say something to the effect of, we want to do a psychological exam and a medical exam, but if you pass both of those, we have a job waiting for you. And then after that, there'll be a final interview with the chief just to make sure that the chief is bought off. This doesn't happen everywhere, but it does happen in a lot of agencies. And then after that, you're on to recruit training. Okay, off to post, peace officer standards and training. And they establish those minimum standards we talked about earlier. And you might go over to the Post website to look at those. I'll link up to this link as well for you to take a look at that. But when you go over to the Post website, you can see those minimum standards, and this is where you're going to get your initial police academy training. And then after that, you're going to go into the field training program. Now, down here on the bottom, I put sponsored or self-sponsored. It is still possible to go through Post without being hired by a police agency. You can do that right at CWI through their law enforcement program and get that certificate, have that training done, and make yourself more employable, more hireable, because that has already been done. Police academies, they can be stress or they can be no stress. My police academy was kind of intermittent. There was a little bit of stress, but it wasn't as stressful as an academy as on this video that I'll show you and I'll link up to in the Blackboard. And then there's just a fun video there from Forrest Gump that shows a little bit of the beginning of basic training in the military. But a stress academy is modeled after basic training in the military. A non-stress academy is modeled after adult learning concepts like we do at CWI, basically saying students no longer respond to these stress type academies. We still have both. I'll tell you a quick story. My police academy in California was kind of in the middle. There was a bit of stress. So, for example, we had to have uniforms on. Everything had to be perfect, shined up, polished, all of that. When somebody walked into the room that was not a cadet, everybody had to come to attention. We had to do things like that. There was running as punishment, things like that. But there was a guy in my academy who got hired by the Los Angeles Police Department about 3-4 weeks into our academy. So he left our academy and he went down to the Los Angeles Police Department's academy. That was a stress academy. On day one, they were all in their best suits because they did not have police uniforms issued to them yet. And if somebody messed up a question, they would all have to go run and do push-ups in their suits and their ties. That was a stress academy. All right, let's talk about academy curriculum. So you go to an academy that is not put on by the agency that you're going to work for, this is what you will learn. You're going to learn your state laws as well as constitutional law, which is procedural law. So remember, we've talked about substantive versus procedural law. Your state laws are going to be things like murder, manslaughter, rape, theft. That's going to be that'll be substantive law. Your constitutional law will be things like the Fourth Amendment, search and seizure, freedom of speech, Miranda. That is your procedural law. If you are at a police academy that's put on by the agency that you're going to work for, say the Boise Police Department, then you're going to learn policy and procedure for that agency. But if you go to the general post like at CWI or at the Police Academy in Meridian, you will not learn policy and procedure because there's going to be multiple different people from multiple different agencies going to that academy, and so they can't teach everybody's policy and procedure. You're also going to learn officer safety, defensive tactics, building search techniques, how to use firearms, traffic stops, defensive drivings, and much, much more. You'll learn about ethics. You'll go through scenarios, and you're going to have written testing on state and constitutional law. Then out of the academy, you're going to go into your field training program. Now, each recruit is assigned an FTO, a field training officer. Now, hear me when I say this. The field training officer is an officer that has more experience than the trainee at that agency. Now, you may come in from, Well, you may be like me, and you may have come from California to Idaho to work as a police officer and got hired by, say, the Boise Police Department, and you might wind up with a field training officer who has less experience as a police officer than you. So maybe you could teach the field training officer some things about police work or about tactics, but the field training officer will have more experience at that agency than you, and so they're teaching you how to do police work the way that agency wants it done. So that's a big distinction there. So these are experienced officers that are training new officers. It works in phases generally, phase 1, 2, 3, 4. And then once you complete the field training program, you will go out on your own, but you'll still be on your probationary period. And all that means when you're on your probationary period is that you're an at-will employee. You don't have civil service protections yet. They're still watching you to see if you, once you're out on your own, are going to be an effective police officer for that agency. And if they determine that you won't be, then they can let you go without cause. They don't have to go through a civil service type firing process. Generally, you'll make it through probation, you'll get off probation, and then all of those civil service protections will attach to you. Then there's ongoing training and education. So there's in-service training because the state is going to require you to go through a certain amount of hours of ongoing training every year. There's various professional schools and conferences you can go to get more specialized training. And then if you go into a specialized unit, like SWAT or detectives, maybe even bike patrol, you can get specialized training in areas like that as well. Promotion. So now, as we talk about the selection and development of police officers, now as you get more time on the job, you get more expertise, and you're ready to lead other people and to forward the mission of your police department, you might want to promote, go up to, say, sergeant or lieutenant or something like that. This is a graduated process, so you will promote, say, from patrol officer to sergeant. The next step would be lieutenant, and you've got to go through an assessment process, a civil service type protected testing and assessment process for each of those promotions. So it's competitive, and it's trying to eliminate bias in those promotions. And generally, in a municipal police department or a local agency like a sheriff's department, generally, when you do promote, you will go back to where you started, which is patrol, and then you'll have to test and promote out of patrol again, say if you wanted to be a sergeant in detectives or something like that. All right, everybody. Well, that's what I've got for you this week. Make sure you check out the chapter and make sure you contact me with any questions. Also, there's videos on here about getting hired by the FBI. It's a whole different animal. Make sure you watch that and let me know if you have any questions there. Also, any of you who do think that you would like to go to work in the federal law enforcement system, especially the FBI, get a hold of me. Let's talk about your major. Let's talk about what you're doing in college. I'll give you a hint. Majoring in criminal justice is probably not where you should be, so let's talk about that. All right, everybody. Have a great week.